never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stone.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live here on YouTube, and we're back. Post-draft, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to talk about it for the next 4 days.
Sweet.
You ready?
Yeah.
Man, draft weekend, and just waiting for it forever, and then it's over in a blur.
It is. It's
sometimes
pretty,
you fall asleep and don't wake up in time.
Yeah. How'd that go?
I was in bed 20 minutes ago.
Nice.
Bad work by me.
Yeah.
Pretty bad.
I mean, you got in on time.
We made it.
About.
We made it. Luckily, I live close.
Yeah.
Even got my hair done, if you can tell.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So, yeah, draft is over.
Same.
And we're going to review. Yeah, looks good. We're going to review every single team's draft. You know, everybody else will do a draft grades show. You know, we do 4. We do 4 shows.
Well, we started off doing a draft grades show, and then, the way we go, that just doesn't work.
Every team gets all their love. So we're going with the heavy hitters today. It's the AFC and the NFC East, and then we'll go down the line with division by division for the rest of the week here on the PFF NFL podcast. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll give you our draft grades from others, and what PFF thought and the whole thing. But first, a reminder, the PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Well, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, man, you ready to get into this?
Mm-hmm.
Just right in. Let's go.
What now?
Just going right in.
Oh, okay.
Diving in. We're going to do it. Here we go. Because we're not doing all 32 teams, we can go in normal order. We had a lot of suggestions. Hey, you always start with the Bills. But, yeah, we're going to do that again.
Yeah.
AFC East.
Alphabetically, AFC East.
Starting with the Buffalo
That's just how it is.
Bills. We'll get to the grades in a minute here, but a review of what the Bills did here. Dalton Kincaid going number 1. They traded up to go get Dalton Kincaid. Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida, in the second round. Dorian Williams, the linebacker from Tulane, in the third. Florida receiver Justin Shorter goes in round 5. Nick Brocker, the tackle guard from Ole Miss, goes in round 7. They had another 7th rounder, Alex Austin, cornerback out of Oregon State as well.
And you can see all of this information on the PFF Draft Tracker, which is actually a really useful utility after the draft to get this kind of review. You get to see the pick, where it was in the round. You can do the whole NFL, or you can do by team, and you get the pick grade and the little PFF analysis in there as well. You also get kind of cool stuff, wisdom of the crowd stuff about how many people liked the pick, and also who people were picking at the time for their team when their team went and picked somebody else most of the time. So it's a pretty cool little tool to be able to use even after the draft.
That's what I'm using.
Yeah.
I'm using that draft tracker. So the Bills, I watched and listened to a bunch of the press conferences, actually for every team except the Commanders of the teams we're talking today.
Why do you hate Washington?
It wasn't available.
No.
I didn't see it. I didn't find it on the YouTube. But you get little nuggets and insights and everything. And throughout the draft process, Bills GM Brandon Beane, he answered the media on Tuesday. They do a pre-draft press conference. He said, we're likely moving back. If we're going to move, we're probably going to move back. And then there's also clips on the internet and stuff like that of when they went to go get Dalton Kincaid. When Kincaid fell, remember a lot of us were mocking him at 15, at least in the top 20. When Kincaid fell, Bean said, we knew Dallas liked him. We knew Dallas was going to be in the tight end market. We thought we were going to move back the entire day, but he kept falling and falling. We made a move to go get him. Called the Giants. They said no. They wanted Deonte Banks. Called the Jaguars. They said yes. Bills get their guy, Dalton Kincaid, to come in to complement Dawson Knox at tight end and give another weapon to Josh Allen.
Yeah, a lot of Bills fans didn't like this pick, judging by Twitter, but I don't really care that it doesn't, seamlessly fit with exactly where their needs are on offense. I just think a guy that good is too good to pass up on. And I love the idea that they went and got him once they saw him start to slide. I genuinely think Dalton Kincaid has incredible talent and is maybe the best pure pass catcher in this draft when you fold in wide receivers and tight ends. And you figure out how to use it. Like if your offensive coaching staff cannot work out how to deploy all of the weaponry that the Bills have, that's a failing of imagination. That's not a failing of the players that you're bringing in. So, yeah, would it be great if, there was an elite number 2 wide receiver that you love that you could put in there next to Stephon Diggs and complement Dawson Knox, the tight end who's already there? Sure, but there wasn't. So you go after a guy like Kincaid who's just amazingly good, and you figure out how all the pieces go together later.
So how do those pieces fit? We've seen a lot of teams do this through the years. I think the Doug Peterson Eagles a few years back were heavy 12 personnel. That's 1 running back, but 2 tight ends, right? They had Zach Ertz, but also they drafted Dallas Goedert, and they made it work. Goddard is probably a decent comparison for Dalton Kincaid, other than maybe size, and Kincaid's a little bit more athletic, but I think Goddard's really athletic in his own right. How do you make this work? I think Dawson Knox is a solid enough blocking tight end. He's been in the 60s and 70s in his PFF grade from a run blocking standpoint almost every year of his career. He's not your big, 270-pound old school hammer at tight end, but he can play in line well enough. And then Kincaid moves around the formation. And Bean even said, hey, he's not going to major in run blocking, right? He's going to major in running routes, getting open, all of the feel and the stuff that you were raving about pre-draft, you give that to Josh Allen. That is, I think, a huge win, potentially a huge win for the Bills. I understand there's risk with tight ends in the first round, all that stuff. I think potentially it's a big payout here.
That's the only problem that they have, is that neither of these 2 tight ends who you would want to deploy at the same time in personnel packages are really good run blockers, or in fact, particularly good run blockers. Dawson Knox has been fine, but he's fine in that category of we kind of keep him away from the really, important run blocks because he can't really do those. And he's good at the other stuff. But in an ideal world, if you were going to go heavy 2 tight end formations, one of your 2 tight ends would be able to go properly in line, execute legitimate blocks against defensive ends, that kind of stuff. They don't have one of those guys. So it isn't a natural fit. But this is the NFL in 2023. To say it can't work is crazy. Like, you just have to figure out a way. It's also, I think, made better by the fact that in the second round, pick 59, they end up getting a guy who a lot of people were talking about them as maybe snagging in the first round anyway. And that happened a few times in this draft. Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida, that was a pretty common first-round pick for Buffalo. There was a few teams who ended up drafting a guy that they were being talked about in the first round later on. They trade up, they grab a Dalton Kincaid who just has insane talent, too much to pass up on, and you're able to get a guy that a lot of people were expecting you to draft anyway a round later. When you put those 2 together, I think that can't have gone better.
I like it a lot. Osiris Torrance in the second because, yeah, it does. I think from our standpoint, if you asked us a week ago, they're going to get these 2 players. It's like, all right, how'd they trade up? Why did they trade up for a guard? Osiris Torrance. But Torrance falls to 59. Maybe the league didn't like him as much as we did, but you can see the grades on the screen if you're watching YouTube. Run blocking grade of 89.9 just last year at Florida. Over the last couple of years, he's shown he could run block both at Louisiana, at Florida. When you watch his tape, you see him when you run inside zone, those downhill types of runs, and he's comboing with the tackle, and they just absolutely wreck defensive tackles. He is powerful. He's good enough in pass protection. I think this fit Osiris Torrance to the Bills and some of their, minor pain points as one of the better teams in the league, the short yardage stuff, the stuff where it's 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, and they're like, hey, Josh Allen, go be Superman. I think Osiris Torrance, not single-handedly, but is a very good piece to help that specifically. You're not drafting him in the second round just for short yardage, but I think it's a big addition for the Bills, and all of this stuff, all of these moves help take pressure off Josh Allen, which we talked about every single week last year. Is this Josh Allen's just going to have to take over and run and pass and do all these different things? Dalton Kincaid gets open, Cyrus Torrance opens holes in the run game, and now you're allowing other people to help your Superman quarterback.
Yeah. No, I think the first 2 picks for Buffalo couldn't really have gone any better. I mean, again, I understand reservations about how exactly Dalton Kincaid fits in, but a guy that talented, I don't care. Like, make it work.
Yeah, so I think so he could play either left guard, right guard. He'll step in, starter potential right off the bat for the Bills. And then they get linebacker in the 3rd round. I think there's some similarities here to Matt Milano, but Dorian Williams from Tulane, the model really did like him. Flies around, sub 4.5 speed from Tulane. Better coverage grades than run grades. Those are the comparisons I'm making to Matt Milano. Milano coming out of Boston College and even early in his career with the Bills, one of those guys that had a pretty consistent good coverage grade, but the run grade was kind of all over the place. But I think Dorian Williams has very good potential here in the 3rd round.
Yeah, there's comparisons to Milano in that dynamic, better coverage than run defense. And then there's also the sort of comps to Tremaine Edmonds with serious range, serious wingspan, the kind of the length that he brings to the table and the athleticism. So it's a little bit of a composite of the two. And with Edmonds now obviously departed and gone to Chicago, it's a good guy, I think, to bring in, pair next to Milano and try and repair that linebacker core.
We'll also try to touch on some of the undrafted free agents and everything as they come up. If there's any notable names for each team, but the rest of the Bills draft, a guy like Justin Shorter, so he was one of the receivers that Anthony Richardson worked with at Florida. He showed up well. We've been working on some athleticism scores here for using game metrics, Sam, using some special technology, in-game type of stuff. Justin Shorter showed really well in a lot of those numbers for us. Brocker from Ole Miss adds a little depth on the offensive line at guard and tackle. So we're not going to go through every pick on the show. It's more like, hey, here's some notable day 3 guys and some notable UDFAs that they may have signed. Anything else stand out to you about the Bills draft, or do you have any broad overview?
I think this was a good draft. It got an A grade using the overall grades that PFF gave out on the website. I think that's fair. Like, just from the first 2 picks alone, if they hadn't done anything else in the rest of the draft, it would have been fine. It would have been a good draft. The first 2 picks, I don't think could have worked out much better for Buffalo than they did. And Dorian Williams in the 3rd round, I think those first 3 rounds, days 1 and 2, were basically a home run for Buffalo at that spot.
All right, with that, we're keeping pace. 15 minutes in, one team down. On to the Miami Dolphins, who had only 4 picks. We could keep this tight. We can keep it really nice and tight here with the Dolphins. Only 4 draft picks for the Miami Dolphins. The top one was Cam Smith, the cornerback out of South Carolina, in the 2nd round at pick 51. They add so much more speed to the team in the 3rd round. Devin Achane, the running back out of Texas A&M. Elijah Higgins, a wide receiver to tight end conversion type of player in round 6. And then offensive tackle Ryan Hayes out of Michigan in round 7. Dolphins overall, solid draft for what they had. They've been giving up picks for players over the last couple of years. So on their team, guys like Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill and everybody that they've added the last couple of years, that's why they're here as far as not having that many picks. But the roster's in pretty good shape, and they had, I think, a really good player in Cam Smith at pick 51.
Yeah, I love that pick. I think Cam Smith has first-round ability in this cornerback group. I think he probably slipped a little bit. He's another one of those guys where last year wasn't great, but I think you can explain it away. They had him covering the slot a lot, which he can do, but I just don't think it's what he's best at. So I think between a sort of switch in position slightly and just not playing to his strengths, I don't think Cam Smith looked as good last season as he should, and he did the year before. So if you go back to the 2021 tape, you see a guy that absolutely belongs in the 1st round, and it's just now the flexibility that Miami defense has with Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard already there. You add Cam Smith, who I hope stays outside, and that lets you keep Jalen Ramsey in the slot the way the Rams were using him the last couple of years. But But theoretically, you can do it the other way around. You can put Jalen Ramsey back outside, put Cam Smith in the slot. It would work. I just think the first way around would be better. But to me, pick number 51, particularly when you're Miami, you don't have that first-round pick, right? It gets forfeited from the tampering charges. You're like, oh, man, who's going to slip to 51? That's the first time we come up. For you to get there and Cam Smith to still be on the board, I think is phenomenal. I mean, luck, value, whatever you want to put it. It's a great result for Miami.
Yeah, sorry. They've been giving away picks for players and also the tampering charges. Yes, thank you for adding that back in. Yeah, I mean, I think they got a fringe first-round type of player. Absolutely.
Fringe.
They were first round? Full first round?
Yeah.
Where the consensus board had Cam Smith right at 36 on my board, at least, just before the draft. So that's close. Yeah, so they did ask Chris Greer, Mike McDaniel, they did ask about, the media asked about Jalen Ramsey. Does this mean Jalen Ramsey's moving to safety?
Okay.
And they said, no. Mike McDaniel, roughly, loose quote here. He's like, no, Jalen Ramsey's really good at cornerback, and I don't like to mess with good, right? So Jalen Ramsey's still going to play corner. So when teams talk about, we trusted our board, this was best player available, I believe it was for the Dolphins, right? I mean, when teams say that, they say that all the time, and they might be telling the truth. But I think it's real when the depth chart backs that up. When you legitimately have 3 starters at your 3 spots at cornerback, you could say, they got really good slot play. Kader Kauhu last year stepped in and played the slot really well as a rookie. Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard, and they still draft Cam Smith. But I think that's good over time, right? Just because you have 4 picks, this could be a really bad draft if they just tried to fill a couple backup needs here and there across the roster or whatever it might be. This could help the draft where you only bring in 4 players, and a guy like Cam Smith was probably the best player on the board at that time.
Yeah, and even if Cam Smith doesn't feature year one, let's say they stick with the guy who was playing the slot. Let's say Jalen Ramsey stays outside, and there's just no space for Cam Smith. It's a move that can absolutely future-proof the position. Like right now, there's a ton of money tied up in Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard. At some point in the future, that's probably not going to work, right? Either you're going to give Tua a giant deal or there's money going to go somewhere else. You're going to want options or flexibility to get cheaper. And if Cam Smith is able to step into that role in a year's time or whatever, it's still a really good pick at 51 overall. So I think there's a way to get him on the field as a rookie and have him contribute. But even if he doesn't, there's still nothing wrong with the pick.
Then they add more 4-3 speed.
Yeah,
to the Dolphins offense. Devin Achane being the running back out of Texas A&M, 4.32 speed. What?
Nothing.
I thought you had some. And a good football player too, right? He's not just a fast guy, but when you talk about the fit to the Dolphins, the Dolphins and the Shanahan scheme, they do a really good job of putting running backs in position to get to space. You already have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and all this speed all over the offense, and you just add this to the mix. Raheem Mostert is, again, already there with his 4.3 speed at running back. Just makes the Dolphins, running back or not, makes the Dolphins all that much more to stop on offense.
Yeah, there's now 4 absurdly fast guys on that offense, and the slowest of them is Jalen Waddle. That's how fast that collection of players is. Jalen Waddle is the slow guy of the 4. That's ridiculous. Yeah, Devin Achane, it's your Raheem Mostert, backup essentially, the guy that has legitimate game-breaking speed. If you can get him a crease, if you can get him a little bit of space, he's got the kind of ability to immediately hit that hole and bam, turn a little bit of a gain, turn a little bit of a gap into an explosive play, which is everything in today's NFL. Being able to get those chunk plays and move the ball significantly downfield, that's a huge part of his game, in addition to manufacturing all that extra space with the 2 speedsters you have at wide receiver already. So really like that. I can't kind of quibble too much with the players that Miami drafted overall. The next 2 picks, Elijah Higgins, who they're going to move to tight end, and then Ryan Hayes, the offensive lineman from Michigan, they're fine. What are we, 6th and 7th round for them? So when you're into the 6th and 7th round, they're unlikely to be massive impact players anyway. Your only kind of question is, did we do enough to address the offensive line? Or did we do anything to address the offensive line effectively when a 7th rounder is the only addition? Miami's offensive line is still a work in progress. They've done a great job in overhauling it, but they're still a reasonable distance short of everything being fixed. Instead, I don't want to call Devin Achane a luxury pick, as a sort of like a backup speedster running back, but it kind of is. So, you would look at that and you would say, third round, pick 84, was there an offensive lineman that could come in here at this spot and start right away? Now, maybe they look at that and they say no, and you can make that argument. Like a lot of the offensive linemen at that point had already gone. But if there was, you could kind of say, all right, that's potentially leaving something on the table. Now, you look at the next offensive lineman that went in the draft, and you could absolutely make the case that, look, these guys are not starting year one anyway, so what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of addressed that at the press conference, too. It was an interesting quote. They basically said, I think you guys, talking to the media, I think you guys are more worried about that than we are. And I don't know if that's through the lens of you're more worried about us filling our needs when we go into the draft, or you're more worried about perceived weaknesses, maybe the offensive line, some of the places we've talked about. Most Miami media was like, okay, where are the offensive linemen, where are the tight ends? Tight ends specifically after they lose Mike Gesicki, Durham Smythe and Eric Saubert are the two guys listed as the starters going into the season. But I think, the Dolphins reminded us, and I think every team, every fan base should be reminded, there are other ways to get players. There are still players like, not for the Dolphins specifically, but Taylor Lewan is still sitting there in free agency to maybe play for a year and fill in an immediate need, right? There will be guys that get cut coming out of the draft. So there is more when it comes to offensive line depth or maybe tight end for Miami. But I think it's a fair point when you look at running back in the third round, maybe versus some of the other offensive linemen. But you're certainly not drafting a lineman in round 3 saying, come start for us. That's what the Rams were kind of forced to do last year.
Right.
Because they put themselves in this position where we're a Super Bowl team. We have no early picks. We have to spend third rounders on future immediate starters.
I mean, it's possible. It's just, it's difficult. My only point with that is, yes, look, there are other ways to add these players. I would simply say, I saw Liam Eichenberg play last year. I saw Greg Little play last year. You're going to want a player to come in. Like, you don't want that happening again. So, yes, it might. You can make a fair point that either you're not fixing it at this point in the draft, or there are other ways of doing it. But it does need to be done. Like, it isn't. It's not just a problem we can go, this is all a media creation. This isn't an issue. It is.
Liam Eichenberg's slated to be the starting left guard, and Austin Jackson the starting right tackle.
Yes.
I think those are the two places. The one thing that could save Austin Jackson is that whole third year 3-4 breakout year for offensive linemen. Maybe they're banking on that for both guys. But on paper, once again this year, it looks like 3 out of 5 spots look solid for Miami, and one of them is from Teron Armstead, who has been hurt almost every year of his career.
Yeah, you've got to build in we're probably only getting 3/4 of the season from Teron Armstead, because that's the baseline at this point.
All right, let's go on to the New England. Oh, so how about a grade?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, what did they
B- per PFF, and I think you're gonna see this with a lot of the grades. Teams that draft 10, 12 players will have more likely to get higher grades. Teams that draft 4 players, it's like, how well could you have done? I think they did. I think the Dolphins did pretty well.
Yeah,
starting with Cam Smith in the second
round.
I
love the Cam Smith pick. He was one of my favorite corners in this draft. I think he was underrated. I think he's better than the consensus board, which admittedly, data would tell you is a risky way of doing things. But when you get him where they got him, which is value either way, I think that's a great pick.
So the New England Patriots, they drafted 12 players. It started in round 1. They had pick 14, traded down to pick 17 to get Christian Gonzalez, the cornerback out of Oregon. I'm not going to read all of them, but the top 3 picks all go to the defensive side of the ball. Keon White, the edge out of Georgia Tech, goes at pick 46 in round 2. Marte Mapu for the safety/linebacker out of Sacramento State goes in round 3. Then there was a bit of a run on centers and guards for New England. That was 3 out of their next 4 picks.
This is the board part of the draft. Like, it feels like the New England Patriots draft is essentially the first 3 rounds, and then they just got bored and started adding random players.
I mean, they got a bunch of guards and centers, and they had the first draft since 2000 that featured both a kicker and a punter. And so they traded up to get kicker Chad Ryland out of Maryland.
I didn't realize until you told me that Shane Lechler came from the same draft where Seabass was taken in the first round.
Yeah.
I never realized that until right now.
They got the 2 biggest legs at their respective positions in the same draft.
Everyone was so focused on the fact that they drafted Seabass, a kicker, in the first round, that they drafted one of the greatest punters of all time later on, in the same draft, and that's just never been brought up because it's like, oh, look at them crazy Raiders drafting a kicker in the first round.
Yeah, the Patriots trading up like 8 spots or whatever it was to get a kicker in the 4th round is always fascinating to me. Like, what do you know that you need to do that now? Drafting punters and stuff round 6, Bryce Behringer has a chance to be the punter out of Michigan State, maybe the best 6th round pick in New England Patriots history as a 6th round pick here, pick 192. And then they go speed toward the end, couple speed players, Amir Speed specifically from Michigan State. Demario Douglas out of Liberty and Isaiah Bolden out of Jacksonville State. I mean, they have all Jackson State. That's what I should have said. So yeah, they had like little runs of here's our interior, here's our defense, interior offensive linemen, special teamers, and some speed players.
It's like we've done the main picks. You have a bunch left. Like we need some offensive linemen. Let's just draft 4 of them. And then all right, we need some. We need these other places. Let's just draft 4 of them. Sooner. I mean, it's not a dumb way of doing it, to be honest. Like just. We need this position, draft 4 guys, and see if any of them pans out.
Yeah, I don't think, of course, I did listen to Belichick's press conference. He was as dry as usual.
Forthright as usual, huh?
Of course. But I do think a lot of these aren't, hey, man, we're going to get these positions. We're going to go. They do go by, like, these are the players we had graded best, so we're going to go.
They brought in Malik Cunningham, the Louisville quarterback, as an undrafted free agent. Bill Belichick and the Patriots generally, or whatever you want to, that decision-making personnel dynamic, Belichick does seem to skew towards these mobile quarterbacks in a way you don't expect him to. Like, okay, they end up settling on Mac Jones or Drew Bledsoe or Tom Brady, but all the way along, there's like this sort of dalliance or slightly weird fascination with players that are the exact opposite end of the spectrum, which I always find kind of fascinating. Like, you keep hearing stories about how enamored Belichick is with, Lamar Jackson, and then they end up somehow settling on the prototypical goofy, immobile pocket quarterback.
It's that defensive coach who knows how difficult it is to stop those guys. So
he just wants a really good scout team guy, like somebody who can emulate everybody else while he sticks with his rigid, pocket passer.
One of the themes you and I came up with after round 1, was a lot of players that maybe had some question marks went to the right spot. And I think cornerback Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon, you were lower on him than most. But when we talk about the fit, going to New England, it's a really good one.
First 2 guys. Yeah, Christian Gonzalez, the Oregon corner, and Keon White, the edge rusher from Georgia Tech. I love the fit for both those guys. Did you see Keon White being drafted, by the way?
No.
I did not see a single drafted player look less enthused by being drafted by wherever he was drafted. Like, he did not look happy that he'd been drafted by the Patriots. I don't know if that was specific to the Patriots or maybe the man just doesn't show a lot of emotion. But
so there was a point in the press conference where they went to Bill and they said, hey, Keon White said you didn't even talk to him during the process.
Yeah.
And Bill was basically like, I'm not going to imitate his voice, but basically, hey, we've been following him for years. We know the coaching staff. We did have some of our scouts talk to him, but sometimes they talk to so many scouts you don't really know. But it was interesting because they didn't have him for a visit or any of that stuff. So I think Keon White was maybe surprised.
But like the way Bill Belichick answers questions at a press conference was like the way he was answering the phone when he was drafted. And it's like
maybe it's a perfect fit.
Okay.
Hey, we scored a touchdown.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I did see that after. Yeah, somebody said Keon White with his Bill Belichick.
Yeah. So look, Christian Gonzalez, we've covered this a lot. I didn't love him as a cornerback. I think he's an incredible athlete. Like the movement skills, if you were asked for that part of it, like if you break down on-field technical ability, performance sort of technique, he's not great. If you look at the physical tools, the size, speed, movement skills, all that kind of stuff, he's your prototype. He's exactly what you want, probably the best guy in the draft. So it's the melding of those two things that's the issue. But if anybody can marry those two together in the best way possible, it's Bill Belichick, one of the greatest defensive coaches of all time. So don't love the player, love where he's ended up to actually be able to tap into that potential and realize where he can go. Same thing with Keon White. Like we talked in the pre-draft in our edge rusher rankings, he just reminds me of like somebody slapping a helmet on a raging bull and painting the quarterback red and saying, go get him. It's just this wild, manic, out of control, like crazy rampage towards the quarterback. And the physical tools that he has are crazy, but he's very far away from sort of putting all that together as like a polished, impact pass rusher. Again, now he's going to Belichick. Like, that's perfect. Now, and also, in Keon White's defense, he did show progression throughout his career and even throughout last year. You could see he was better at that stuff towards the end of the season than he was at the start of it. So he's already shown the ability to be coached and to improve at the stuff that he was bad at. So those first 2 picks, I just didn't love Gonzalez as a player, liked Keon White a bit better, but either way, the two guys I think that need a lot of defensive coaching, going to a guy who might be the best of all time at that, I think is phenomenal fit for those guys.
So Gonzalez comes in. I think he's better in man than zone. I don't know if New England wants to get back to playing a little bit more man coverage and developing a guy like Gonzalez and his athleticism. They brought back Jonathan Jones this offseason. You have Jack Jones there. You have Marcus Jones there. So you have a lot of pretty good.
The Joneses.
Yeah, pretty good in a Gonzalez. And Jalen Mills comes back as well. But you could see Christian Gonzalez competing for starting spot with opposite Jonathan Jones right away, with Jack and Marcus Jones and Miles Bryant fitting in there. So I think it's an improved cornerback group. Keon White does get to just get added to the mix as far as the defensive line goes. And then Marte Mapu, the safety linebacker hybrid, he did not work out, but it was a productive safety at Sacramento State and did line up everywhere. He was the classic, Patriots versatile guy, move around all over the place, played linebacker mostly at the Senior Bowl, so you bring him in, and he could be eased in as well. Kyle Duggar, they drafted a couple years ago with a somewhat similar type of profile. Maybe Duggar, has his profile expanded just a little bit, so it's just business as usual for New England, right? Add some defensive pieces. One of the interesting moves here is them sitting at 14, and Broderick Jones, the tackle out of Georgia, was probably the last of the big 4 tackles. Mm-hmm. And I think when people were mock drafting for New England, tackle came up quite a bit, because right now, what do they have at tackle? Trent Brown at left tackle in the last year of his contract, and then this offseason brought back Calvin Anderson and Riley Reif. You have Yodny Kajust. You don't have Connor McDermott. You don't have even 2 starters where you're like, hey, short and long term, we're all set here at tackle. But New England decided, we're going to get Gonzalez, we're going to get the extra pick, maybe roll with what they have at tackle or figure it out later. But that was one of the moves that it's just an interesting move, right? Well, to say, hey, we're good enough at tackle right now.
Also, because the other element of that is not only obviously do they sacrifice any drafting that tackle themselves, but they also essentially allowed Pittsburgh to jump the Jets. Obviously, division rival, There's a lot of talk that the Jets wanted Broderick Jones, and then once Broderick Jones was off the board, that's when they pivoted to Will McDonald. I wonder if that played any factor whatsoever in the Patriots being open to that trade. It's like, hey, we're okay with it, and it means the Jets don't get the guy they want. Like, win-win. So, who knows? It's probably not, but it's an element that certainly didn't hurt, I imagine, if you're New England, that you end up hurting the Jets slightly as well. One pick later on that I think is worth bringing up as well. They were the team that drafted Kayshon Boutte, the LSU wide receiver, who was always going to fall in this draft. Workout numbers were bad. Basically, everything seemed to be bad in terms of attitude, doesn't really care type of approach to this whole thing. But if you go back far enough into his LSU tape, you see a guy who arguably had talent to be the number 1 wide receiver in this draft, And then it all fell apart. Disagreements with the coaches at LSU, didn't work out the way he was expected to, fell for a variety of different reasons. But this is a guy that does have top-tier receiving talent, and again is going to this, very specific environment in New England where this is the way we do things. If you can get on board, there's a way for you to get to tap into that talent and realize what you're able to do. There won't be many 6th-round wide receivers taken with that kind of upside.
With Boutte or Boutte, I wrote down the word smooth several times when watching him along the sideline as a route runner. When he's on, things look good. They look easy for him. Not very good at the catch point. Dropped a ton of passes. But there's a lot of potential there, right? A lot of the things that you and I not push aside, but we say these might be overvalued in the wide receiver evaluation, which is how often you catch it and how often you catch it in traffic. If you can offset that by just being a good route runner, being open, it doesn't matter as much. Booty seems to have some of that. So, I mean, I love it as a 6th-round pick. I talked to people around the league who said, we talked about this guy forever. We debated him forever.
Yeah. As
in, he sometimes looks like a 1st or 2nd round talent, and other times it's like, do we even want to bring him into the building?
Right.
So 6th round is a good spot. It's a good spot to take that type of shot.
I feel like the Patriots are still one of those teams that are not worried about, like, so there are teams that don't want to bring a guy who could be a potential attitude problem just into the environment because it could destabilize the entire locker room. Like, the whole thing could spiral out of control. I still feel like the Patriots, even in a post-Brady landscape, are one of those teams that are not worried about bringing in like one guy that could wreck everything, you know, and be a problem to cause issues. Like, they'll just, all right, we take a shot. If he's not the guy, we get rid of him. It's fine. Like, they're not worried about the entire thing going to hell. But even if you look at his stats, like, he averaged over 2.25 yards per route run in 2020, 2021. Those are pretty big numbers, even for a guy that didn't have a ton of overall production those years. And then it fell off last year along with everything else in his game. But, like, again, for a 6th-round pick, almost pick number 200, for a guy that, if he'd actually like kept himself together, could easily have been the number 1 wide receiver in this draft.
I mean, if Kendrick Bourne heads into the last year of his contract, if Booty takes over for him next year, I'm not surprised.
Sure.
If Booty's off the roster next year, also.
I mean, if he's off the roster by week 1,
by week 1, yeah, also not surprised. A couple other picks to highlight really quick. I like City So out of Eastern Michigan. And guard, he played tackle, but he's more of a guard type of body. He's moved around back and forth over there. Productive player. And then wide receiver Demario Douglas out of Liberty, 7th-round blue for me. So get him in 6th round. Good value there as another potentially productive receiver there. So that's the Patriots draft. PFF grade of A- over at PFF.com for the New England Patriots. All right, that puts the Jets up now. Jets started with your guy in round 1, Sam. Oh, by the way, we should also highlight the Patriots and Jets did execute a trade together. That was, I think it was the trade that the New England Patriots used to trade up to go get a kicker. The Patriots and Jets talked and traded with each other.
I wonder if they told him it was for a kicker, in which case the Jets were like, oh,
have
at it.
Can you throw in Belichick just to go full circle here? Will McDonald, 1st round, the edge out of Iowa State, goes pick 15. Joe Tippmann, the center out of Wisconsin, in round 2. Didn't have a 3rd-round pick, but the Jets go in round 4. Carter Warren, the tackle out of Pittsburgh, and then his teammate, Izzy Abanikanda, the running back, also out of Pittsburgh. Some athleticism with Zaire Barnes out of Penn State. Jarek Bernard Converse, the cornerback out of LSU, and the super athletic tight end, Zach Kuntz, in the 7th round. Nice little flyer there. What are your initial thoughts on the Jets draft here? Of course, they started with pick 13, but last week, they flipped it to pick 15 here with the Aaron Rodgers trade.
Yeah. So obviously Rodgers comes in, and one of the big questions is, what do the Jets do to make Aaron Rodgers happy? The Packers seem to steadfastly avoid doing that in the last few drafts, and the Jets didn't really do it either. They didn't add, certainly, receiving weapons for him. Now, look, the Jets have some receiving weapons. It's not like it was a glaring need or anything, but I'm still interested that they didn't go out of their way to sort of add a high impact pass catching weapon for Aaron Rodgers. Instead, maybe they wanted Broderick Jones, and then when Pittsburgh jumped them and grabbed him, they pivoted to Will McDonald. Either way, that's the guy they end up getting. A lot of people saw that as a reach, and by the consensus board, it was, which is the thing that's been shown to have the kind of predictive or the important part of it. I think he's a better player than that. I mean, he was my number 2 edge rusher in this draft.
So look at the consensus board unless your rankings are different.
I'm not saying don't go with the consensus board. Consensus board had him at 33rd. So fringe 1st-round pick, ends up going in the middle of the 1st round. I just think he's better than that. Maybe I'm wrong, but if that's what the Jets are looking at, I think he's maybe the most talented pass rusher in this entire draft. And when you consider what he was doing with those kind of 4-eye alignments, just inside shade of the tackle in that Iowa State defense, and he was still able to put up impressive pass rushing production. What was that quote that Robert Saleh had? We're going to move you away from the 4-eye and make you a 9.
Yes.
That's exactly it. They're going to take him from this inside shade over an offensive tackle, and they're going to move him out into space, and they're going to say, go nuts. Like, everyone was saying, you saw all the time in mock drafts, like Robert Saleh gets his Nick Bosa, and it was always like Tyree Wilson or whatever. Okay, Will McDonald isn't the Nick Bosa either, stylistically. But the point being, Robert Saleh wants a guy that can pin his ears back, go get the quarterback, and Will McDonald can do that maybe better than anybody else in this draft class. So maybe it was a reach. I still love the fit. I still think Will McDonald going to Robert Saleh's defense is an incredible matchup, and I love that.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Douglas did state they trusted their board and the whole thing. I think the interesting thing here is at 13, the same thing we said about New England, at 13, would the Jets have gone with the last tackle on the board, Broderick Jones? Would he have been their guy? We mocked a tackle to them quite a bit. I mean, that's the only thing if for fan bases coming out of the draft. When you don't fill what seems to be a direct need, it's a little uncomfortable. But I'll always push back and say if they have to pick up a cut player or a waiver wire player, there are still starters that will be out there between now and September 1st. There will be starters if you really need to get somebody. But the tackle questions of Mekhi Becton never being on the field, Dwayne Brown being old, your two potential left tackles, Max Mitchell, your starting right tackle, struggled a little bit as a rookie, but you would have rather upgrade that spot at some point if you can. As far as the fit for the Jets, I completely agree, right? The athleticism and the burst off the edge for Will McDonald, you covered it well. And then Saleh's defense, it's not about having a Bosa or having a one player. They want to have 8 players, right? So if Carl Lawson's still on this team, I'm assuming he is. I just know you could cut him at any time, just like Corey Davis. But Will McDonald, Carl Lawson, Jermaine Johnson last year, John Franklin Myers, Bryce Huff. Those are 5 edges who can get after it, not even including Quinnen Williams on the interior, Quentin Jefferson, who they bring in. So they're much better on the edge than D-tackle, other than Quinnen Williams, but there's some depth there for the Jets. There's also this kind of 1 or 2 year implication that they're going to be winning more games. So I've seen that comparison to, hey, Peyton Manning had his Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis off of the edge.
Yeah.
Where if you're up 2 scores,
you want an edge rush.
You want a guy like a Will McDonald, coming off the edge who can get after the quarterback. So that part is all interesting for the Jets. I'm fine. I'm fine with this pick because I think when you were projecting pure pass rushers in this draft, McDonald was right up there with Will Anderson and whoever else. I think he's potentially a better pass rusher than Tyree Wilson and some of the other guys.
Oh, I think he absolutely is a better pass rusher
and will be. We'll see, but I'm fine with that for the Jets. Tippmann, you get a starting center in the second round. I think the teams that got their second round centers, I think are going to be happy. Tippmann's a good, solid player. Carter Warren's interesting. He is a developmental tackle prospect. The production is poor historically, so developmental is, I think, what he has to be. And Abanikanda, the running back out of Pittsburgh, you already have Breece Hall as a home run hitter. There's another one, right? So there's even more big playability added to this offense.
There's also still a world where Elijah Vera-Tucker plays tackle for them. I mean, he's been moved all over that offensive line with injuries, and I think he's shown that he could play tackle and be okay. So, Tippmann coming in, basically adding any interior offensive lineman gives them the flexibility to potentially kick Vera-Tucker back out to tackle and use him there if that's where they think like the best combination of 5 offensive linemen is. So sure, there'll be guys available. They could potentially add a tackle in free agency or before the draft or before the season rather. However, there's also a situation where they go, okay, let's juggle the interior a little bit and we'll move Vera-Tucker out and he's our right tackle for the moment.
Yeah, so at least there is some O-line flexibility there.
Yeah.
General theme of the draft, too. I thought most teams drafted pretty well. I don't know if that's how I always feel coming out of the draft. There was a statement from a Browns exec last year that the league's getting better at this, generally. Not like, picking overall the right players where they're supposed to be picked. I felt like that for most of this draft, that most teams were picking good players overall. Not a ton of crazy reaches and that type of stuff. That's
the thing. I feel like when you see all these draft rooms, and in almost every case now, there's somebody on the analytics side in the room, and it's like, hey, look, here's this guy that nobody's ever heard of, but is like, the math nerds know him, because he's their analytics guy. I feel like those guys are having input now, and there are so few teams at this point that are just completely off on their own. It's like, no, we are 4 scouting guys in a back room making our own board up, and we're just drafting according to that. And I don't care what's happening around the league. I don't care how everybody else ranks these players. Like, they operate in a vacuum, and that's it. I think everybody now is getting much better at understanding the relationship with evaluations to the consensus board, to player position value. Even, we've talked to some guys where position value, I think, still has a way to go. But I think the idea that teams are getting better at this is probably true. The analytics, the data approach, just understanding how all this stuff folds together is getting better. Like, it's like the fourth down decisions. The leaps we've made just over the last decade and that stuff has been insane. Like, decisions are being made now where it would be ridiculed 10 years ago, but it's not now because we understand, and everybody's getting to that point. Everybody outside of most announcing booths, that is. Obviously, they just go, the analytics says go for it. Who knows? But this is the draft now. Like, it's not the days of Al Davis just like sitting in a room going, give me the guy with the 4.27 speed and to hell with everything else, are kind of gone.
So our grade here at PFF, B- for the Jets. I think part of that will be most people saw the bit of a reach on Will McDonald. I agree on your point, though. I mean, I think the fit and everything. I mean, I don't really care that much about picking anybody between 15 and 40, really. Not that they're all interchangeable, but I don't think Will McDonald at 15 is egregious, but I get it as far as it is higher than expectation. We'll see what happens on day 3, too, with the Jets. I think Abanikanda has a chance. Zach Kuntz, maybe in a couple of years, we're like, hey, there's the athleticism. Take that shot.
Zach Kuntz's athletic profile is really just ridiculous. Like, you look at the percentiles, and he has 2 percentiles, I think, that are not in the 90th and above, and they are for weight, right? And he's 257 pounds. Yeah. So, like, weight is one of his problematic statistics, and that's him at 257 pounds. That's the 78th percentile. And then the bench press, where he only repped out 23 times at 225, which, again, is the 80th percentile. Everything else is 90th or above. In fact, it's 93rd and above. 99th height. He's 6'8". But vertical jump, 40 inches, 98th percentile. Broad jump, 10'8", 97th percentile. 3-cone was 94th. 20-yard shuttle, 95th percentile. The 40-yard dash, 4.55, 93rd percentile. The 10-yard split was 93rd percentile. I mean, this is the Trayvon Walker of tight ends. And actually, ironically, similar problems in terms of, like, the on-field stuff wasn't there. But this is maybe arguably the greatest physical profile a tight end has ever stepped into the league with.
It really is. And because of that, I'm surprised that he lasted as long as he did.
To the 7th round.
Yeah, I thought he would go higher. I mean, he's absolutely huge. The combine's insane. He doesn't always win at the catch point for a guy that's a monster. It doesn't always look all that fast.
Yeah.
Or change of direction doesn't look special on the field, but he's still kind of a young football player. Snaps-wise, like, absolutely take that shot if you're the Jets.
I mean, the 7th round, like, absolutely. Like, if you were told that you could get arguably the greatest athletic profile to ever play at that position,
particularly
in the 7th
a tight
round,
end,
like,
yeah.
I wouldn't, like, that's the kind of position where, like, I wouldn't even care if he played football before. If you just gave me that athlete and said he's a designated tight end, right? He ran a couple of routes of training one day. Cool, I'm in. That's it. I don't need to see anything else.
So there you go. Jets, B-. You probably would have been a little bit higher on the Jets because you love Will McDonald.
Yeah, look, I mean, the reach element of it has to be, I think you have to bear that in mind. Like, there is not a good track record when people reach relative to the overall board. Now, it's not an egregious reach. Like, it's borderline first round to the middle of the first round. It's not like they took a guy who was a consensus 3rd round pick and they drafted him in the middle of the first. So, but you do have to at least acknowledge that the consensus board has that guy, 15 picks lower or whatever. But I do think there are reasons why he's a better player than the consensus has him ranked.
We also don't know exactly what they could have done, but if they could have traded down 7 or 8 spots and still gotten him, like, right, there is this hypothetical world where it could have been more efficient, more effective.
And it's a little bit of a worry anytime you're like, it looks like they might have wanted player X, but then player X got taken and they did something weird at the end of that. Like, just anytime you pair what is a sort of unusual move, relative to convention, like reaching 15 or 16 picks or whatever for a guy, with something happened just before that might have upset their plans. That's when it starts to look a little bit, panicky. But as I say, I really like the fit, at which point I'm a little bit more predisposed to explaining away the reach.
All right, let's move on to the Dallas Cowboys. They start with defensive tackle Mazi Smith out of Michigan at pick 26 in round 1. They go back to Michigan. Luke Schoonmaker, the tight end from Michigan. I think he goes to pick 58 in round 2. A little bit higher than we had expected for him, but there was a tight end run going on there in the second round. DeMarvion Overshown, the linebacker out of Texas, long player, former safety there. One of my favorite players, Viliama Fahoko, the edge/defensive tackle out of San Jose State. I think he has a chance to make an impact. A couple other day 3 picks that were interesting. Eric Scott Jr., cornerback out of Southern Miss, and then Deuce Vaughn, the running back out of Kansas State. Chris Vaughn, front office member for the Dallas Cowboys. That's his dad. And you may have seen the viral video of Chris calling his son Deuce and saying, "Hey man, come to work with me next week." Pretty awesome moment during the draft. Love all of those. Watching people have their dreams come true, and then particularly Deuce Vaughn gets to go play with his dad in Dallas. So that's the Cowboys draft. I've got some thoughts. What are your initial thoughts on the Cowboys draft, though?
I think it's okay. I mean, Mazi Smith makes sense for them. They've needed that strength inside for years, and I think finally went hard to address it with the first round pick. I think we've reached this point in sort of football now where when you sort of take a strong interior guy that focuses more on the run than the pass, it just feels unexciting. It's like, I'm looking for a flash. And it's kind of an un-Dallas move, right, to go away from flash and actually aim for some substance. But for that defense, I think it's actually a really important addition for them. Like they have had that weakness inside for so long, and maybe for Dallas more than other teams, it's actually important because you're facing Philadelphia twice a year. They have a cheat code with double cheek push right now. All of a sudden, you're plonking a guy in the middle there who's a brick and saying, all right, I can bring something to the table to try and offset this a little bit. But like they're a team that might actually want to focus on that interior run strength more than other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he stops the QB sneak.
Nobody does.
By himself. Yeah. But run defense generally has been an issue for Dallas. It is interesting hearing Jerry Jones at the press conference acknowledging, I believe it was Russell Maryland was the last defensive tackle that they took in the first round, and they took him number 1 overall back in, 91, 92, whatever it was. Jerry Jones was basically saying, like, we don't do this. Like, we wouldn't even have had this conversation 10 years ago in Dallas to take a defensive tackle that high. But they referenced the structure of the defense, what Dan Quinn has built. I think how loaded they are at edge rusher with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, Sam Williams. And this has been a multi-year issue, right? I mean, this has been and so over the last couple of years, they've been saying, how do we get this big run stopper? So that part I get. Luke Schoonmaker, I think you hear Mike McCarthy talk about him a little bit, and he was an athletic tight end. I think, which is fine. Production was okay at Michigan. Athleticism's good. McCarthy was talking about the versatility they need in the tight end room. This felt like a need pick, right? You lose Dalton Schultz to free agency. Jake Ferguson gets drafted last year. He's more of a move type of tight end. And McCarthy kept referencing how they need their tight ends doing all sorts of different stuff, right? They have all these different roles, and Schoonmaker can maybe fill those. My theory on the Cowboys draft is that they cycle between grabbing the best players and just filling out the depth chart. Mm-hmm. And this felt like a depth chart type of draft. And I just want to go back through the last couple of years. The times where it felt like they weren't necessarily filling out the depth chart were where they hit the biggest home runs. Yeah. That's when it was 2020. They drafted CeeDee Lamb when they already had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. And it was like, yeah, of course we're going to take CeeDee Lamb here. Also get Trevon Diggs in the second round that year. And then 2021, where it felt like they needed a corner. Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn go 2 picks ahead of them. They get Micah Parsons. Generational type of edge. Like, we haven't seen anybody like Micah Parsons, really. Edge, linebacker, do it all type of player. Hit a home run with that pick. Last year, the Cowboys in the first round, they needed a guard. They drafted the guard. Tyler Smith. So this year, it does feel like a bit of a need-based draft. And even when you hear them talk about it, it's like we wanted to get bigger, stronger, tougher in the run game this offseason, so we got Mozzie Smith. And we needed a tight end that could do all these different things, so we get Schoonmaker. And so I'm not saying it's going to work or not work or whatever. I feel better about Cowboys drafts when they do go with the best players. I think they've done a good job at evaluating players through the years.
Yeah.
And I feel a little less good about Cowboys drafts when it feels like they're filling needs. All that said, I think Mozzie Smith is fine. Like, he is one of the few nose tackles in this class that doesn't get moved by double teams. Like, that actually can hold up.
Yeah.
And it is, I think, going to have an impact on this Cowboys defense that has had a huge hole on the interior for multiple years now.
That's becoming, you hear all the time about football being cyclical. That's the thing that we're going to start to come back towards that now. Like, we've been headed towards these Kalijah Kancey style players of smaller, quicker, faster, penetrating interior guys. And now every year, when you start going through all these interior guys, you're like, can do whatever as a pass rusher, doesn't hold up against double teams, right? It's almost universal, every single one of them. So to me, it's like when you're focusing on Kancey and like that's your criticism, okay, you need to fine. It is a problem. The dude's 281 pounds. Of course he's going to get moved by double teams. But you also need to put that next to the baseline of what you're saying about every interior defender at this point. Like, that's just the inevitable result of the way the interior players have gone. But it does mean that players like Mozzie Smith, who don't get wrecked by double teams, are starting to become rare. And when you're rare, there's a low supply, and there's a low supply, there's high value. So all of a sudden, those guys are going to become high impact, high value players because there's just not many of them left. So I think we're reaching this tipping point now where players like Mozzie Smith are going to become more coveted and more valuable again, simply because the supply of them is dried up. And at some point, you still need players on the inside that can stop the run. And PFF WAR values those players a lot higher than you would expect. But I think the league is going to start valuing them again because there's just not many of them.
Yeah, and Mozzie wasn't a crazy reach or anything. My consensus board had him at 35. He goes at 26. Because the Bills leapfrogged the Cowboys, there is a world where the Cowboys would have picked Dalton Kincaid, right? Mm-hmm. They had the tight end need. They would have found a way to use him perfectly fine as a pass catcher, and then they could have circled back and got Siaki Ika if they really needed a nose tackle from Baylor or something later in the draft. So the Cowboys are always fascinating. It feels like they're very often one or two picks away from the guy that you felt pretty strong that they were going to take. So it's going to be another, good storyline to follow, watching Kincaid and Mozzie Smith and those guys develop.
The tight end pick was interesting because they took him at a time when Darnell Washington was sliding. Darnell Washington was the guy people talked about as being a potential first-round pick. I always thought that was a little bit crazy. But then we reached a period in the draft where there's players getting taken above him that also seems a little bit crazy to me. When you're Dallas and you're a team that does actually covet the inline ability of a tight end, so maybe they wouldn't have necessarily been in love with a guy like Dalton Kincaid, but Michael Mayer had been a guy mocked to Dallas a ton because of that inline all-around ability. Darnell Washington is that guy, and yet they chose to go in a different direction and pass up on somebody with that kind of inline size and ability.
Yeah, Michael Mayer. So in the second round, before Dallas picked, Sam Laporta goes to the Lions, Michael Mayer goes to the Raiders, Luke Musgrave goes to the Packers, and it's Schoonmaker who they take as the run continues. Brenton Strange went to Jacksonville after that, but Schoonmaker was next. It did feel like it was like, hey, we have to get our tight end, right? So those are the things that scare me a little bit long term. Like, Schoonmaker's fine as a prospect. It's probably 40 or 50 picks higher than expectation, but you're playing the board, you're playing the run, and that's why it happened.
Yeah, but it's also one thing to sort of pick a guy and get in front of the run stopping, but pick a guy that's in that realm anyway. You know what I mean? Like, if they'd gone, there's a tight end run happening, we've got to grab our guy, and they'd grab Darnell Washington, you're like, okay, the consensus board says that's the right kind of area, or even good value at that point. That makes sense. But when you jump on the train and you're like, tight end run, got to grab a guy, and you pick a guy that's like 40 spots higher than the consensus spot, now it's like that just feels a little panicky. Now we've reached for a guy to stop to make sure we don't get left out in the cold when the run starts. That's where it starts to get worrisome.
Positive note here for Schoonmaker in Dallas. looking at the things that project for tight ends, 10-yard split is a pretty strong projector at the next level, and he's a 90th percentile player in that particular number. So there's something to look forward to. Fehoko from San Jose State, I liked him a lot. Really good PFF grades. He's an edge in name. I thought his pass rush snaps at 3 technique were fantastic. You see the 90-plus PFF grade. He got to the quarterback. Man, I didn't even think he was going to go that high. He felt like one of those under-the-radar, NFL's just going to – he's going to look like a great 6th or 7th round pick. But the fact that he went in the 4th, I'm glad that the NFL was onto him a little bit, or at least the Cowboys were. I think he could really make an impact as a pass rusher.
He's got a really – I mean, he's a very strange prospect. Weird body type, this kind of 275-pound, chunky, big guy. Who actually has like a really nice suite of moves, can win around the edge with the ghost move, which you don't see for a guy that weighs 275 pounds, but also has, inside spin moves, has plenty of power. Like, he's got a lot to bring to the table. But he seems to be, he's not good once he gets past the guy. Like, quarterbacks just sort of take one casual step to the side and walk past him.
The Henry Anderson.
Yeah, and he just goes flying into the backfield having beaten his man. He's got some work to do on that stuff.
Well, that's perfect because you're going to have Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, you got other guys to
he's also
clean it up.
Really quick to leave his feet and try and bat a pass. Like, again, if you're a quarterback and this is your guy that you have to deal with, like 3 minutes of watching his tape and you're like, all right, there's 2 things I can do to make sure he never sacks me. Like, either take a quick step to the side or simply go, and they'll go, and then just walk past him. Like, he's got a few things he needs to work on, but he does beat his man a lot, and that's pretty important.
Just to circle back to the 3rd round quickly, DeMarvion Overshone, he improved his run defense grade by over 40 points last year. So he was horrible against the run in 2021, but he was a converted safety, moved to linebacker, doesn't have a linebacker-looking body. He's super long. He looks kind of like a Jaron Kearse type, and they did bring that up at the press conference. Is he the next guy to cover tight ends and have this versatile role? All that's fine, but he's got some growth as a player, but a lot of people loved Overshone in this draft.
Yeah, there were also 5 straight rounds for the Dallas Cowboys where the user pick, the PFF users during the tracker, were trying to make them select Dwayne McBride, the running back, before they finally selected Deuce Vaughn, the running back. Now, very different running back, but still.
Yeah.
Like 5 straight rounds, everyone was like, Dwayne McBride? No, it's somebody else.
Deuce Vaughn, your Darren Sproles comp, take Kansas State. They're both 5'5", whatever it is. I mean, Deuce Vaughn can play, though. He's good. Darren Sproles could, too. But I'm just saying, Deuce Vaughn can play, despite his size, really productive, get him out there with Tony Pollard. I think he's got a chance to steal some snaps.
I mean, historically tiny, but yes, can absolutely play, can absolutely make an impact. He's a good player. He got freaky movement skills, which guys that size obviously have to have. Otherwise, you wouldn't even hear them. They're not factors if you don't have that kind of movement skills at that size. So, yeah, like he'll contribute. I mean, he'll make plays. The question is, how much can you use a guy like that? I mean, Darren Sproles is sort of the optimal. Like, that's as much as you can use him, I guess. The Eagles have Boston Scott, who's very similar in terms of size, really, really small guy. Yeah, Deuce, it's going to be fun to see how much they're able to use Deuce Vaughn.
The one other guy I want to highlight is Eric Scott Jr., the cornerback out of Southern Miss. You and I have a fun history of quote-unquote one-play scouting. It's not so much that you just only watched one play, but there's one play that stands out. The one play that stands out to me, Eric Scott Jr. was at the Shrine Bowl. He goes one-on-one with Zay Flowers, who goes in the 1st round. And it was one of the better routes I think I've seen Zay run, a little short in. And I'm like, wow, that's incredible quickness by Zay Flowers. Great route. And this is all happening in like a split second in my brain. Mm-hmm. And then the cornerback breaks up the pass.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Who did that? Who hung with Zay Flowers on one of his better routes? And it was Eric Scott working in off coverage. And you look up his athletic profile, and he's this, my numbers, 90th percentile, numbers that project to WAR, numbers that project to actual on-field production. But the actual on-field production for Eric Scott, not that great at Southern Miss. But you're talking about a potential project in round 6, and did have the good Shrine Bowl and all that stuff. I think Eric Scott Jr., just a guy I'm going to be keeping an eye on. In part because he broke up the pass against Zay Flowers when I thought Zay ran a great route. So there you go. All right, Cowboys grade from PFF, we're going C+. In part, I believe, because of those reaches near the top. Again, I think it can work out. How do you feel about that C+? It's probably one of the worst ones we gave out. I haven't looked at all of them.
It really is it's where you got the value. I mean, Mozzie Smith, I think, is fine as a pick. What do we give it? We gave it an average grade. I think it might be a bit better than that. Schoonmaker is the questionable one early. Like I think that's a significant reach given what was on the board, even knowing that there was a tight end run going on. And then later on, I think they reached a little bit for a couple of picks as well, and just kind of trusted themselves rather than the board, which is always, fine, but a little bit of a question. So yeah, it's maybe a touch harsh, but I get it.
Yeah. I told you, it's the drafts that feel like need drafts that don't feel as good for the Cowboys, and the ones where it just felt like, hey man, they just got the best players available that not only feel better, but end up, I think, working out a little bit better for the Cowboys in the long run. All right, New York Giants are up next. They start with Deonte Banks, the cornerback out of Maryland, at pick 24 in round 1. Round 2, they get John Michael Schmitz, the center out of Minnesota, guy that I was mocking for them at pick 25.
Right. Another one of those teams.
That's right. Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, they get him in the 3rd. Running back Eric Gray from Oklahoma in round 5. A couple other day 3 picks in there again for the Giants. But those top 3 picks, Sam, really interesting because, we could say this about a lot of players, but all 3 of those picks have at least seen their name in a first-round mock draft over the last couple months. So Banks in the 1st round, get an athletic corner. I think they have John Michael Schmitz who could step in immediately at starter, at center, and then Jalen Hyatt, speed receiver in round 3. The Giants, this offseason and this draft, have absolutely gotten faster. I'll say that, with Hyatt, with Banks. But interesting draft for them, especially with 3 players who were projected to go higher at least at some point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously John Michael Schmitz is the sort of standout, obvious value from that. We were putting him in the 1st round. We weren't alone. I mean, the Giants' official Twitter account was asking pre-draft, like, oh, here are the 4 options. Who do you want us to draft? And John Michael Schmitz was one of those guys in the 1st round. So to be able to come back at pick 57 in the 2nd round and still get him after having spent your 1st-round pick on a guy is incredibly good for them. That's a perfect fit. He can come in, start day 1. We talked about it on the draft show. The question mark for him is athleticism, right? The only reason he's not seen as this consensus 1st-round center is, does he have the elite athleticism of guys like Tyler Linderbaum or whoever it is you want to put in there? And he doesn't. On the other hand, his tape is littered with the kind of blocks that you need the athleticism to make. Like, the reason you want a center to be really good movement skills is so he can execute that reach block on outside zone, get across a full shade, beat a nose tackle to a gap based off speed. John Michael Schmitz does that all the time, at which point it doesn't matter what his 40 time is or what his short shuttle is or any of that stuff, because he's already shown you repeatedly he's able to make that play. So I think that's a great pick for them. Deonte Banks is an interesting one. Incredible athleticism. He's right up there with Christian Gonzalez in terms of prototypical measurables, speed, size, all that kind of stuff. And he's similar to Gonzalez in terms of he's not as good a football player as he is an athlete right now. I think he's closer, though, than Gonzalez is. I think I had him slightly ahead in my rankings, 3rd versus 6th or whatever. And he goes to this defense, the Wink Martindale defense, crazy defense, as Steve has called it every now and again.
Crazy.
That wants to play man coverage. And this is a guy that can absolutely play man coverage. He can mirror receivers. He's got the speed to run with anybody. He needs a little bit of work in terms of putting it all together, but like, that guy can absolutely stick with receivers and play man coverage.
There was I didn't catch it because we were, live on the air covering it, but supposedly there was a live, reaction from Wink Martindale and a big high five or something when they got Deonte Banks. The Giants also traded up 1 spot, right, from 25 to 24 to make sure that they got Banks. Mm-hmm. He grew on me a lot the more I watched. The raw data, the production data for Banks isn't great. The athleticism data is outstanding, and it shows up on the field, right? I mean, I love watching him just glide around the field. So I think definitely a good fit for what the Giants are doing. I liked all 3 picks. The other interesting note from the press conference was about Jalen Hyatt. The media was trying to ask about the scheme and the route running, and they didn't really get into it. They said, hey, we believe he can run the routes that we need to run. We run a lot of the same routes here. The other interesting note was GM Joe Shane was at the Alabama game. That was the one that put Hyatt on the map, 5 touchdowns and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that had the influence on him. They took him at pick 73. It's not that was like the right range. But he was, Shane saying, I was on the field. I couldn't make it to the press box because of certain travel restrictions and all this stuff. And he's like, I could feel the 4.3 speed. I'm always fascinated by how much the in-person evaluation is weighed for people. Like when they're in draft meetings, is everybody like, oh, Hyatt can't do this and he can't do that, and Joe Shan's like, wait, I was on the field, I saw it, he's fast. We should get him. They didn't overdraft him or anything like that, but I'm always interested when people talk about, I was at the game when, and Shane happened to be at the game when he scored 5 touchdowns against Alabama. That has to weigh in your brain from an evaluation standpoint.
Yeah, it's the perfect range for Jalen Hyatt. I think from a value standpoint, it's great. I wonder a little bit how this wide receiver core fits together. They have a ton of these guys that are either slot or speedster only or a combination of both. And you're like, who's playing outside and defeating man coverage? Now, Jalen Hyatt, we don't know that he can't do that. He simply has essentially never been asked to. Like, the guy's had a handful of snaps against press coverage in his entire college career. He spent the entire time playing inside in the slot, usually off the line of scrimmage, protected by stack formations, all this kind of thing, essentially to tap into what he's able to do really well, which is run deep down the field from the slot. Can he play outside? Can he still get that done on the outside against press coverage and all those kinds of things? No idea. And neither does anybody else. But that's where that's why he's in the 3rd round, not the 1st round. If you already had a ton of college tape where you could see that he can do that, he'd be a 1st-round player. The fact that we don't know is why he slides as far as he did. But for them, it's good value. We just don't know quite what kind of impact he's going to be able to make. One undrafted free agent that the Giants made that I thought was interesting, they got Bryce Ford Wheaton, the West Virginia wide receiver, who has insane size, athleticism, ridiculous speed. He struck me as a poor man's Quentin Johnston. And I was like, if you could tell me you can get Quentin Johnston in the 1st round or this guy on day 3 sometime, I would take this guy on day 3 sometime. And he didn't even make it to day 3. The Giants picked him up as an undrafted free agent. So it's not often you see these undrafted free agents with like a real pathway through to playing time. But I think there's one there for Ford Wheaton and the Giants.
Yeah, there absolutely is. I mean, look, a lot of teams have themes and goals in the offseason. I believe the Giants came in and said, we're going to get faster. We have to get faster. I believe they have. Paris Campbell coming in this offseason helps that as well. But a lot of these draft picks, Bryce Ford Wheaton in undrafted free agency, there is a path for him to play. I'm also, with Hyatt in particular, you know me, I love deep threats no matter what. Anybody who could be a deep threat fits in every single offense. But especially offenses that use the QB run game as much. So with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley in the backfield and some of the misdirection and deception that they create there, can they just open up Hyatt just a little bit to give him those free runs and tap into that speed? That's interesting too as a fit, I would say, for the Giants. Day 3, Eric Gray was a really productive running back out of Oklahoma last year, 90-plus PFF grade. He's got a chance to come in and steal some snaps as well. So it was a good draft. I know Trevor loved it, man. A+ for the Giants because, again, you get – if they took John Michael Schmitz in the 1st round, I know that's a reach on the board and stuff like that, but I think production-wise and projection-wise, it would have been fine. It would have been a fit. And you get him in the 2nd, you get Hyatt in the 3rd. I think they just did trust the board and got a lot of good players, particularly in that first couple days. Yeah.
Now, anytime, I mean, any of the teams that essentially got what we thought were 2 first-rounders from a talent standpoint, with a 1st and a 2nd round pick, I think you can. They're already on the fast track to an A type of draft, and then as long as you don't screw up the rest of it, I think you're laughing.
All right, Philadelphia Eagles are up on the clock. Speaking of A+, they start with a couple Georgia guys. Jalen Carter at number 9, the defensive tackle. He falls to 9, and the Eagles trade up from 10 to 9 to secure him. They let Nolan Smith, the edge defender out of Georgia, fall to them at pick 30. They go Tyler Steen, tackle/guard out of Alabama in round 3. They had another, and then the back-to-back picks there. 2nd pick there was safety Sidney Brown out of Illinois. Go back to Georgia with Keely Ringo.
In the 4th round.
In the 4th round, a cornerback who people thought could go in the 1st. They get the great Tanner McKee. Round 6, pick 88. Quarterback out of Stanford. And then Moro Ojomo, the defensive tackle out of Texas. I thought he was more of a 3rd or 4th round player, and he goes all the way in round 7. So look, our process, right or wrong, when players go lower than expected and you draft all of them, that feels good.
Yeah.
Coming out of draft day and when we put the draft grades together. That's what the Eagles feel like right here. They got a bunch of players lower than expected.
Yeah, and this is where there isn't evidence to say that that's good, right? There is evidence to say if you reach relative to the consensus board, that's bad. Generally speaking, trying to be smarter than the board is a bad thing. There is not evidence to say, however, that if you go in the reverse, if you consistently grab guys that are falling, and essentially you're like, oh, look, we got great value. These guys are ranked higher on the consensus board. There's not evidence to say that that consistently works out better than just drafting whoever the consensus says. Essentially, I think the logic is that if a guy's falling, it's probably for a reason. And it's a reason that the consensus board doesn't have access to, injuries a lot of the time. So there will be injuries or off-field or whatever it is, character. There will be a bunch of reasons that are legitimate for a guy to fall that the consensus rankers never have access to. The question would be, though, does that taint that data or that analysis, that conclusion? Like, if a guy is falling for reasons that aren't clearly explained by a medical red flag or like a character concern we don't know about or whatever it is, like something legitimate that means you would rank him higher based off the tape than you would if you knew all this stuff, is that actually swaying the analysis to say, well, if a guy's just falling and there isn't an explanation for that, you do get good value by stopping that fall and grabbing that guy? That, I think, is probably a little bit up in the air. But you look at Philadelphia's haul. I mean, the Jalen Carter thing, we lost a bet off the back of that, our podcast bets. Our final tally, by the way, we won 28 of them. We lost 9 of them, I think, from the ones we accepted.
Do we want to go through those maybe on Friday? I think it'd be Friday.
Maybe, and we'll fire out the emails and the free PFF Plus subscription to all those people eventually. But the Jalen Carter one was one we lost because somebody said somehow how he's going to work his magic and the Eagles are going to come out of this draft with Jalen Carter. And this was back when, everyone was like, he's going 5, he's going 6, he's not making it out of the top 10. And he didn't. He started to slide, and the Eagles went, we'll jump up one spot and we'll grab Jalen Carter, who is arguably the most talented player in this entire draft. And a couple of things. Number one, gets to go to a defensive rotation that's not going to need him to play a ton of extra snaps. One of the concerns or question marks about him and anybody coming out of that Georgia defense is they rotate so heavily up front. They only play 350 snaps in a year. What happens if you ask him to play 700? Do you get the same thing? Well, he doesn't need to. Like, the Eagles rotate as well. He doesn't need to play more than 350 snaps in a year. And number two, he goes to a defense that is already stuffed full of Georgia defensive players and leaders in that team. Like, Nakobe Dean was the leader on that defense in 2021. He's now their starting linebacker in Philadelphia. They already had Jordan Davis. He's been there for a year. They bring in Nolan Smith a bunch of picks later. They bring in Keely Ringo a bunch of picks later. Like, they are assembling guys that he already knows that might have some kind of influence in terms of keeping him together and on the straight and narrow and whatever, and avoiding any potential maturity concerns that other teams might have had. So, man, Jalen Carter going to Philadelphia, insane. Then sitting there at 30 and having Nolan Smith drop into their laps, also insane.
Yeah, that was one of the more common questions for Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni at their press conference was, how nice is it to have him with a bunch of former Georgia Bulldogs? It's like, yeah, of course you'd want to be in a new job with friends from college. Who wouldn't? Who else wouldn't help? Who wouldn't that help? As far as transitioning to the NFL. Nolan Smith, I thought he could have gone top 15. Very good pass rusher, 238 pounds, still powerful in the run game. And look, this is the Eagles staying true to form, right? Because they don't have a defense. It's not just a defensive line rotation. It's a team that builds through the offensive and defensive line. They're always good in those areas. And the two Bulldogs, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, get to sit there right next to Fletcher Cox as he, rides off into the sunset probably in his career for the Eagles. Learn from Fletcher Cox. Nolan Smith gets to be right next to Hassan Reddick. You've made that point a ton, right? Similar body type, similar player. So the Eagles, it's not a cheat code, but it's like they were equipped to take both of these players, right? Mm-hmm. It is a very good fit. And they did a really nice job of just letting it come to them. They did trade up one spot to go get Jalen Carter. But also, how are the Eagles? I got to look back at how they got to the spot. I did like a very loose.
Well, this is why
recap
there's so much value sometimes in playing that game of trading into the future and picking up future first-round picks and all that kind of stuff. Because the Eagles, who were a couple of plays away from winning the Super Bowl, have just come out of this draft with arguably the best player from it. That should not be possible. Like, the entire structure is literally set up to prevent that happening. It's like, no, the rich shouldn't get richer. We make the worst teams get the best players. That's how the whole draft is set up to work. And yet Philadelphia is able to come out of this draft with Jalen Carter, who is arguably the best player, because they played this game of, trading some picks into the future, getting an extra future first rounder, and now they were picking in the top 10 anyway when they were, the best team in the NFC.
They earned that, though. I mean, I want to go back really quick just to recap kind of how we got here. By the way, there's also some quote, was it Florio that posted it, that executives, or maybe it was Schrager, executives around the league are, getting a little upset at all the credit Howie Roseman's getting.
I mean, stop giving him the opportunity to make good things happen then.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I'm going to really paraphrase the work that got them here, because there's other picks and there's other stuff in there. But basically, when they tanked Week 17 in 2020, that moved them up 6 spots in the draft, which started a chain reaction of events.
The contrast is just mind-blowing. You got two teams that had the Eagles literally pulled their starters in a game they were potentially winning, to lose a game deliberately and move up in the draft and start this whole thing going. And then on the other hand, you have Houston, who, essentially a Hail Mary attempt to win the game and a 2-point conversion to win it, to steal a win that took them away from what sounded like the one quarterback that they really wanted and put them in the number 2 spot. Like, the difference in those two things is ridiculous.
It is amazing how much impact that has. But oversimplified here, the Eagles turned that Week 17 loss from 2020, and then Carson Wentz, who they were going to already move on from, turned those guys into A.J. Brown, Jordan Davis, and Jalen Carter. Now, I don't know how good Jordan Davis is going to be. I feel much better about Jalen Carter becoming a star in this league as long as everything checks out. They may have found 2 stars there. A.J. Brown, I think, had as big of an impact as any player in the NFL last year going to a new team. And, again, it's oversimplified, but the people that are criticizing Howie, you could say, hey, you know what? Howie Roseman drafted Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
What an idiot, right? But that is literally every single evaluator. That is. What the Eagles have done well is the process part of it. Last year, before the draft, maneuvering picks with the Saints. The Saints got the extra pick last year, so the Eagles could have the first-round pick this year. That's how they got pick number 9, is because last year they said, we're going to keep pushing to the future, but they still had enough picks last year to trade for A.J. Brown in the first round. So accumulate all these assets, maneuver them around, and you're going to win over time. It's the process that the Eagles are winning, not so much the player selection. It's the process that they're winning to put themselves in position so they can let Jalen Carter fall to them, so they can let Nolan Smith fall to them.
And even the process, like when they get it wrong, the process is usually sound. Like drafting Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson was obviously a mistake, but bringing in a first-round wide receiver at that point was a good thing. It was a necessity. It was a thing they needed to do. They didn't get it done. They weren't gun-shy. The next year, they went back and got Devontae Smith at the top of the draft. And Devontae Smith has become a good player, but even after year 1, it's like, is he going to become the superstar? Not really sure. All right, fine. Let's send a first-round pick to Tennessee, and let's get A.J. Brown, who was already a superstar, and that makes everything better. So they didn't, get spooked by goofing one time in a first-round pick. They doubled down and then tripled down over the next 2 years, and that's why now they have this amazing receiving group.
You could say, though, too, the Jalen Hurts pick was actually the first thing that set everything into motion, because he was a process pick. Like, let's just get this backup quarterback with starting potential in round 2, and that allowed them to eventually trade Carson Wentz, which became a first-round pick and put a lot of this stuff into motion, too. So I think it's the process, not so much. I love the Eagles' actual picks. It is their multiple-year process that they have implemented and stuck with that I think has put them into such a great position.
Yeah,
they also
absolutely.
had a point in the draft where they took 2 7s and flipped it for a 5 next year.
Yeah.
They flipped 2 7s for a 5 for next year. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have the ability to do that.
The Keely Ringo pick is a fascinating one as well. So that was at the top of the draft. They traded a third-round pick next year to get Keely Ringo this year. And he was a guy who
pretty high in the fourth too. So I mean, that's only like it's probably only 10 to 15 picks.
Yes, right,
of difference.
Keely Ringo, 38 overall on the consensus board, ends up getting picked by Philadelphia, pick 105 by the time they traded up for that. And Ringo's got some problems to his game, which is why he slipped that far. Like, he's got some real stiffness, lateral movement, change of direction isn't necessarily great. But at 6'2", 207 pounds with speed, you don't generally see players that have that kind of build slip that far, particularly when you consider how old he is. And the comedy stat that was thrown out there over the weekend is that by the time Keely Ringo has finished his rookie contract, he will still be younger than Hendon Hooker is right now. Like, wow. He's seriously young with a 6'2", 207-pound frame. I mean, this is the stuff of dreams from a cornerback scenario. Okay, the change of direction stuff is concerning, but they can now bring him in behind those two like legitimate superstar starters that they have, Darius Slay, James Bradbury, and kind of work out what he can be long term and maybe coach him up and maybe get him better at that kind of stuff. Like, that's a great process pick.
I think it was too. Ringo at that point. The other pick that I just want to highlight really quick. So Ajomo in the seventh. Again, I thought he was a guy that could rush from the interior, play the run, rush from edge as a change of pace. So I think he could be good value in the seventh. I don't know if he'll fit into this rotation, but really, really productive player. I don't know why he went that low. I don't think it's just because he's a tweener body. Those guys, the NFL's figured out how to value those guys at least by round 4. And then the other player was Sidney Brown, the safety out of Illinois. The grades weren't always great. He missed a ton of tackles. But listening to, I know Trevor loved him. Howie Roseman talked about him. They call him a red star player. They have scouts go through and put like red stars across like 8 or 10 players every single draft that they just love and want to go to bat for. He was one of those guys for them. And he was really a box safety who just flies around, headhunter, misses a ton of tackles, but makes a lot of explosive plays. But they were citing his ability to play free safety at the Senior Bowl and at least see that different look that said, hey, maybe he can be a more versatile safety. It's what the Eagles need. He's got a chance to compete for playing time right away because Reed Blankenship and Kayvon Wallace are competing at free safety, or at least in one of the safety spots opposite Terrell Edmonds. So Sidney Brown has a chance to be a starter. I think he's got to clean up a lot of his game, but he is that like firecracker, fly around the field type of player that so many coaches love. And I'm interested because the production data is different from that scouting data, but at safety it could work. So they may have added another starter with pick 66 in round 3.
Yeah.
In Sidney Brown. So we're going A+ for the Eagles. I think I think a lot of people are probably going to land somewhat close to that conclusion.
Execs being like butthurt over Howie Roseman getting a ton of credit, by the way, is one of the most pathetic things I've ever heard. I mean, you can't look at what he's done over the last several years and think that he's not deserving of praise. Like, he's done an incredible job. I mean, okay, everybody has misses. Everybody also has random hits out of nowhere. But generally, from start to finish, the process in building this whole thing has been pretty much flawless. They've played this game to perfection. They haven't always just gambled the way some teams have and gone, well, if this works, we're great. If it doesn't work, we stink. They've hedged. Like, they didn't commit to Jalen Hurts as the starter right away. They specifically played the game of let's trade for future first-round picks so that if he doesn't get any better, we can pivot and go get a quarterback at the top of the draft. Like, they have played this thing masterfully. He deserves the credit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, though. I mean, I remember sitting in meetings with a GM who, you know, if you were ranking the top 32 GMs at the time, he's probably not near the top. Hadn't had the most success. And he's sitting there trashing other teams and how they use their computers too much and they do this too much. And it's like,
that's just the most petty, childish thing. Like, clearly he's done an amazing job. You don't like the credit he's getting, then stop stinking so much.
All right, Washington Commanders are next up on the clock.
Well, before we get to the Washington Commanders, we have to tell people about PFF's post-draft guide, the preview that we've got. It's a PDF that's available all as part of your PFF Plus subscription. It's got player profiles sorted by teams, draft grades, full off-season grades, so free agency, everything that your teams have done so far. It's got WAR, gained or lost by team, and player projections coming soon as well. So a new thing we've got at PFF, never before thrown out there, all part of your PFF Plus subscription. You can see on the screen there's a little QR code you can scan to get your copy as well. Really cool new thing we've got this year.
Well done.
Thank you.
You can do more ad reads. Trevor was a pro, huh? Hosting this weekend.
Yes.
It was a lot of fun. He did a great job.
He did.
Stuck with him all day Saturday, too. Those guys. Saturday's tough, keeping up with everything. It's a long day, but they did it. They did a great job. All right, man, Commanders. They go Emmanuel Forbes, cornerback out of Mississippi State in round 1 at pick 16. Up until draft week, most people had Forbes late first, early second. He goes middle of the first. Jartavius Martin, also known as Quan, cornerback out of Illinois. He's going to go in round 2. Cornerback/safety, really. Ricky Stromberg, safety out of Arkansas, is going to go in round 3. And then they add some developmental players, right? Braden Daniels, the tackle out of Utah. KJ Henry, one of the other defensive linemen out of Clemson. And kind of like running back Chris Rodriguez out of Kentucky, getting him in the 6th round. What were your initial impressions of the Commanders draft here, Sam?
This was one of those drafts you get every year that's just a little bit unusual, just slightly strange. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. Forbes is obviously the thing that this is going to sink or swim on. They bring a cornerback in, and there's a lot to like about Emmanuel Forbes. Like, his tape is extremely good. He's aggressive. He's got great ball production. He's a complete and total outlier, like historical outlier in terms of size, though. And he's 6'1", 160 something pounds. All the guys that have any kind of history of playing in the NFL at that weight at a cornerback position are short slot players generally, or short players. There's nobody that's 6'1" at that weight. Nobody. Like, it's one of one. So again, it's like the Bryce Young thing. You cannot possibly be worry-free about that. It has to be in the back of your mind somewhere of, is he going to survive at this size? And the league is trending in this direction, so this would be completely unprecedented and just not thinkable 15 years ago. Now it's at least in the realm where you're like, all right, we give it a shot. Recent history, really lightweight corners coming out. Cameron Dantzler, also from Mississippi State. His weight is a little bit difficult to try and pin down because I think he put on a ton of bad weight before the pro day it was back then during the COVID year, right, to essentially prove that he could play at a bigger weight than he was at Mississippi State, and didn't work because he put on a ton of weight, ran terribly, and now you're like, uh-oh, what do you do with this? So he slipped to the 3rd round or whatever it was. There just aren't guys that have played at that size, but he does have the length, he does have the ball production at the catch point, and he does have speed, which is something that Dantzler wasn't able to prove he had because he put on all that weight. So he's got the things you need if you're going to offset being 160-something pounds, but it's still scary because, as much as there are short, shifty, smaller receivers in the NFL, and there's more every year, there still remains freak shows like DK Metcalf and, those and A.J. Brown in the same division. I mean, A.J. Brown outweighs him by almost 60 pounds, and he's going to have to face that guy twice a year. That's going to be scary because there's no fixing that. There's nothing you can do. The guy outweighs you by 60 pounds. If he has to get his hands on you, you're going to struggle to get away with that.
So a couple things that will be fun, though. Emmanuel Forbes being in the NFC East. We will get to see him matched up against Devontae Smith at times.
Yep.
We'll get to see him probably matched up against Jalen Hyatt, who's not as slight, but similar idea of, slight type of receiver. At the same time, Forbes might be going head-to-head with A.J. Brown.
Yeah.
As well. Little Ole Miss, Mississippi State, little Egg Bowl matchup down the field. So, it's only those division games. But, yeah, that's where it will be fascinating to see how he's able to offset that. I think he's so gritty and feisty, though, that's to offset the 166. But, yeah, sometimes you're just going to get overpowered.
I mean, even a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who is just sort of normal, prototypical, receiver size, 6'2", 200 pounds. CeeDee Lamb outweighs him by 35 pounds. That's insane.
Wow. There was somebody else. Who was it? Patriots Marcus Jones outweighs him by like 8 to 10 pounds. And he's, your undersized.
He's tiny.
Slot corner.
Yeah.
5'8". So, yeah, that just brings some.
I mean, I outweigh him by 20 pounds.
But he goes at 15. He's the 3rd corner off the board.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Model guy. The data loves him. I haven't adjusted for weight or anything like that. But, the production data is there, everything that we've cited. I think he plays the game. You make the point with short quarterbacks all the time. Like, they didn't just become short once they go to the NFL, right?
Yep.
They've been doing this their whole life. They went through their whole college career essentially accounting for, being shorter than the average quarterback, and they adjust their game accordingly. Can we make the same answer here with Forbes? The fact that, he's been able to do this. He did it in the SEC, was productive in the SEC, and he was able to work around this.
You can, but I think, it's different to quarterbacks where the issue is sort of not the talent level that they're going up against. It's more how does the whole dynamic work. So the fact that a short quarterback has been short the whole way, I think, is important because the game generally is functioning the same. It's all the moving pieces. It's the stuff you're trying to, quantify with S2 cognition scores and stuff. Just how does your mind work in relation to this complex, violent chess game that's unfolding in front of you? And you can see how that works. It's generally the same in college as it is in the NFL. So a guy being short and sort of having experience of doing that is fine. When you're dealing with corners or receivers, the problem is like the structures are all the same, but the players are better. So having had experience of playing your entire career at 160-something pounds is fine, but now you got to do it against much better players. Devontae Smith is a great example, right? That guy's an incredible receiver. He's an amazing player, and yet we still don't know if he can be the player he was in college at the NFL level because he hasn't quite got to that level yet. And is the 166 pounds thing his limiting factor? Because I don't think he's as good at the catch point in the NFL so far as he was in college where he was destroying everybody. So I think there might be a kind of limiting factor to being 160-something pounds. And with receivers, it's still up in the air. With cornerbacks, it's still up in the air as well. So, yeah, look, obviously he's got experience playing at this size, but now he's got to do it against, like, legitimate NFL superstars.
So it was one of the more fascinating picks. It was good to see Forbes, I think, go a little higher than expectation. Very, I don't know, man. He jumped some other corners. He jumped Deonte Banks. He jumped guys that we thought Joey Porter Jr. would be going higher, and Forbes goes middle of the first. So I can't wait to watch that evaluation. That second-round pick, Jartavius or Quan Martin, played slot at Illinois. Unbelievable athlete. He's a bit of a projection. I think he might be able to step right in and play in the slot for Washington. Some people call him a safety. Some people call him a slot corner. He played in the slot mostly for Illinois. We see the 15 four-state completions. He makes a lot of plays on the ball and had ridiculous workout numbers. 44-inch vertical, that's 100th percentile. 11-foot, 1-inch broad, that's 99th percentile. 147 10-yard split, 99th percentile, all at 5'11", 194. So incredible athlete that they're adding to the mix here, and we may have two starters in the secondary here for Washington in the first two rounds. He definitely came off higher. He was 94th on the PFF big board. I think the consensus board also had him in a similar range, so he's definitely higher than expectation. But Commanders were trying to improve their secondary. I think they have a chance to do that.
Yep, absolutely. And then they come back and they grab what could be a starting center for them as well in the third round, Ricky Stromberg from Arkansas. Really, I think Washington's the players that they've got are positions of need. They are, reasonable players. The theme of their draft just appears to have been reaching a little bit. Like almost all of them were taken significantly higher than their position on the PFF board and the consensus board for the most part as well.
Yeah, so Ricky Stromberg from Arkansas, you're right. Like he could, I don't think he takes over from Chase Roulier right away, but gets in there and competes. He's got a little bit more flexibility, I believe, that could play guard. So
yeah.
Unlike maybe Luke Whippler and a couple of the other centers, has a little bit more versatility on the interior. And then Chris Rodriguez at running back, he's similar to Brian Robinson, who they brought in last year, more of a power back and going to run over and through people and create yards after contact and all that stuff. Very productive back for Kentucky for a few years. He was, I think, at some point in the process was talked about being a little bit higher than 6th round, so good spot to get him in there and just get another big body who can run downhill.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Washington. It just felt like a B draft, Sam. And that's what PFF did. That's what PFF gave the Washington draft.
Yeah, I think we generally like the players that they selected. It's just the value that they got them at is a little bit questionable.
Yeah, and it's also one of those, they drafted exactly 7 times, right? There's no, hey, they drafted 12. Hey, they only drafted 4. There's none of this. Just they made their picks, and they were all fine.
How many times did the Rams end up drafting?
I don't know.
Because at one point they were like in the 5th round, and they still had 9 picks, having started with 9 picks.
I told you that they were going to come away, and you're going to be like, wow, look at all these players that could play for them. 3, 6, 9, 12.
14.
14?
14 times.
7 of them could start.
I really like their draft. We'll
Right
get to
away.
that in later
I told
on.
you. I mean, that's what I was saying with the Rams. Like, you're going to come away and be like, look at all these players. They could find dudes who could play. And they doubled up at certain positions of need and all that stuff. It's fun. Washington, by the way, just to put a bow on them, Mitchell Tinsley, wide receiver out of Penn State, undrafted free agent that signed with them. One of my favorites as far as round 7, undrafted type. So keep an eye on Tinsley with the Commanders. Wow, we have graphics for everybody. Look at him.
Yeah, nailed it.
His grades previously, I think it was Western Kentucky, even better than that. So he could do some damage. Get him on the field. Is that it? We're under 2 hours?
I know.
We could probably crank out the other 24 teams here.
Oh, yeah, easy.
Let's just do it all today.
Yeah, no.
And then,
Let's not do that.
okay, we won't. So that's it. AFC and NFC East will be here all week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Those are the next 3 days.
Usually at 10:30 Eastern. But
I
tomorrow,
might need to bump it later tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow is going to be a TBD one because, you have meetings.
I do. I have very important meetings right in the middle of our record time, so we're going to have to bump it a little bit tomorrow. We'll let you know. But we're going to go division by division, 2 per day through Thursday, and then we'll do a little draft bet recap and maybe some draft superlatives or something. I don't know. We'll keep talking draft on Friday. But, we appreciate everybody for tuning in, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's via audio. Again, don't forget the post-draft guide is coming out. I don't know if other people do the post-draft guide.
No?
Like PFF does. All part of your PFF Plus subscription, so go check it out. We'll give a little recap of how well your team did, not only in the draft, but during the entire offseason. Look at that. You got your QR code. You can scan it right there.
Yep.
Pretty high tech. Anything else you got to do here?
No, I think we're out.
One person did lament the fact that we did not discuss the Eagles trading for DeAndre Swift to add him to their backfield with a draft pick.
Yeah.
That is another good move, though, for the Eagles. They have Rashad Penny for, like, my salary.
Yes.
Sorry, pretty close, but $1.35 million, about my salary. DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell's already there, Boston Scott's already there.
The great Boston Scott.
They've got 4 running backs making under $2.2 million.
Not a lot, yeah.
And people wanted to mock Bijan Robinson to them.
Sure.
So they got 4 running backs for the price of 1 Bijan, basically. So just, shout out to the Eagles because Howie Roseman's ego has not been stroked.
So that's one, that's one I think where people probably are going over the top with that. Like, DeAndre Swift is not as good as a lot of people think he is. There's a reason the Lions are looking to move on from this guy. And he's capable of making some big plays and has some spectacular plays on his reel. There's also a ton of plays where he goofs and takes the wrong gap or whatever. Like, he's just, generally speaking, I think the perception of how good DeAndre Swift is higher than how good DeAndre Swift is. So Philadelphia bringing him over for what it costs, sure, absolutely. Great roll of the dice. And behind that offensive line, any running back looks better. So have no problem with that move whatsoever. But I like that, when they make that, everyone's like, oh, how does the league keep letting this happen? Howie, what magic? Like, no, come on. Like, we're going over the top there. That's a fine move. It's a gamble worth taking. It's solid process, but, it's not witchcraft. Like, that's where you're getting over the top with the Howie Roseman praise.
Anyway, good job. Good job, Eagles, overall. It's 1 year of Swift, too, but it's all good. Yeah. All right. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow at some point with 2 different divisions recapping their draft.